All right, I'd like to call the special City Council meeting to order. This is May 6th, and this is for the hearing on the budget, the one item on the budget. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Berman. Burt. Here. Holman. Here. Klein. Here. Vice Mayor Niss. Here. Councilmember Price. Here. Scharf. Here. Schmidt. Here. Mayor Shepherd.
Here.
8 present.
Thank you. All right. On this item, like I said, we only have one item. It's a study session on fiscal year 2015 proposed budget overview. Before we go to that, I'd like to ask the clerk if we have any oral communications.
No, we do not.
All right. And do we have, at this point, we do not have any cards for speaking on the item either, but we might by the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to staff, the city manager, who is going to present the budget.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Walter, are you accompanying me on the slides up there or anything or not? Yeah. Afterwards, okay, great. So I would like to borrow just some excerpts from the transmittal message, Mayor and Council, and introduce this, and then turn it over to Walter and his budget team, of which only a few of you are here tonight, at least. They're resting up for the debate. Okay, and we'll have the opportunity to share the budget document, which has been revamped and had a series of changes made to it, and I'll ask Walter to take the whole council through that. Madam Mayor, members of council, in accordance with my responsibility as city manager as outlined in the charter, I'm submitting the City of Palo Alto's fiscal 2015 proposed operating budget to you. The citywide expenditure budget of $470.1 million has increased by $11.6 million, or 2.5% in comparison to the fiscal year 2014 adopted budget of $458.5 million. The fiscal year 2015 proposed general fund operating expenditure budget of $171.4 million has increased by $11.7 million, or 7.3% in comparison to the fiscal year 2014 adopted budget of $159.7 million. Citywide, this proposed budget includes full-time equivalent benefited positions, which increased by 17.45 positions from 1,019 roughly to 1,036 positions. Despite this increase, a decade ago, the city's total budgeted position count was almost 1,100 at 1,093 FTEs. The proposed expenditure budget is balanced with $169.4 million in revenues and $2 million in contributions from the suggested from the Budget Stabilization Reserve, which will represent a 1.3% reduction from the BSR 18.5% target level in order to fund council-directed initiatives and some major one-time expenses. As part of this budget, the BSR would be set at 17.2% or $29.5 million. This $11.7 million increase in the general fund expenditures is mostly possible due to a significant increase in major tax revenue estimates of $9.2 million. These significant increases in tax revenues are a result, of course, of our much more robust local economy and growth in jobs, which in turn has pushed increased demand for parking, traffic-related responses, the need for infrastructure, which we'll talk about separately, and other city services. These challenges are well represented by your adopted 2014 priorities, which include, and I'll just restate again, 1, comprehensive planning and action on land use and transportation, the built environment, transportation, mobility, parking, and livability. 2, infrastructure strategy and funding, and 3, technology in the connected city. The proposed budget includes proposals in alignment with your council priorities as well as directed initiatives from the council. As part of my review of the city operations during the last year and as part of the development of this budget, I'm recommending additional funding to support certain departmental operation improvements. Before I turn to specific recommendations, I would like to remind the council that since the Great Recession, the City Council has approved various strategies to reduce the cost of salaries and benefits. These strategies include, but are not limited to, employees paying their own CalPERS, retirement share for their employee contribution. 2, increased sharing in the cost of health plan costs. And 3, creating a second pension tier, and the state implemented a third tier effective January 2013. While these strategies have served the city well during the 2008-2009 and economic downturn in the subsequent years, it is imperative for the city to remain a competitive employer while reducing the impact of these fast-growing benefit costs. Therefore, the council approved the modest salary increases while capping the city's health plan contributions with your March 2014 approval of the agreement with the SEIU, our largest union. As I have reviewed departmental operations during the past year and as part of the development of the budget, I'm also recommending investments in additional arts, science, and classes and camps for residents, the development services blueprint, operational effectiveness enhancements, training and succession planning for key departments, and increased administrative and operational oversight. This budget also fully establishes the Development Services Department as an independent department by transferring its development activity-related positions, salaries and benefit costs, and non-salary expenditures from the Planning and Community Environment, Public Works, and Fire Departments to the Development Services Department, and where we're directly aligning the revenue streams and the expenditures in that departmental cost center. Turning to a summary of some of the major investments in service delivery enhancements that the budget includes related to City Council priorities and initiatives, an addition of a budgeting of $1.15 million in transportation funding to start addressing the demands in this area. It sets aside reserves for enhanced shuttle service at $1 million within the city, and consultant funding for establishing a transportation management authority at $150,000, and allocates funding for transportation planning and safe routes to schools in the amount of $232,000. In the Our Palo Alto initiative, we've included $325,000 in funding to support this 2-year citywide engagement effort to create opportunities for dialogue around important ideas and connect to solving some of the immediate problems and the long-term planning for the city and the comprehensive plan. The opening in the fall, finally, of the Mitchell Park Library and Community Center, as well as a Rinconada Library, formerly known as Main Library, are scheduled to open, and in order to ensure adequate staffing for these new facilities, the budget unfreezes 2 positions effective July 1st, 2014 at the start of the fiscal year, and then adds funding for 3 new positions effective mid-year, January 2015, and reallocates funding for hourly staffing in the Community Services Department for after-hour room rental support. A third area relates to the Palo Alto Airport. As directed by the Council on November 13, 2007, staff has been working with the County of Santa Clara to achieve an early termination of the Palo Alto Airport ground lease between the city as landlord and the county as tenant, and transfer of all of the related agreements and instruments necessary for the city's assumption of management and control of the Palo Alto airport operations. And in order to provide sufficient funds for this, the budget allocates $560,000 from the general fund as a startup loan to the new airport fund. Fourth, the 2014 budget includes $331,000 for election funding. That includes the election costs for 5 city council seats and potentially 3 ballot measures, and that's based on the estimate we have from the Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters Office, as well as election notification expenses. As you all know, during the next few months, the council will be scheduled to consider adding ballot measures regarding an increase in the transient occupancy tax from 12 to 14% to partially fund city infrastructure and other related improvements. Secondly, to modernize the city's utility users tax, and 3, to potentially amend the city charter relating to council seats, including term limits, timing of new council member transition, and other matters. Based on the revenue stream in the new Development Services Department and the funding set up for there, the consolidation includes an allocation of $708,000. It includes additional funding for contractual plan check review and inspection services in anticipation of continued high development activity levels, information technology, contract support, and training. And in support of the City Council approved expanded public art program, this budget converts staffing to a full-time public art manager and adds a little more than $100,000 in that arena. Some of this also deals with the changes as relates to the public art for private development ordinance and other initiatives in that area. And then finally, in the community services area, we have included $146,000 for enhanced arts, science, and sports classes offset with revenue to support classes at local elementary schools, summer camps at Foothills Park, as well as middle school athletics programs. Additionally, this budget includes funding to increase the number of summer concerts from 6 to 8 events. In the area of city operations effectiveness, in 2012, the city began a citywide cost of services study. The initial consultant study identified municipal fee cost recovery levels based on 2012 data for all fees other than development activity related fees. And this budget allocates in the amount of $55,000 contractual funding for a consultant to study and assess the planning and community environment fees in that area. We have a small study, but it's related to small cost study, but related to the fire services deployment approaches that we use, and to look at whether or not there are more cost-effective and efficient ways to specifically deploy some of our fire services. And we have an initiative in the amount of almost $1.3 million in the area of technology, which allocates funds for various citywide technology investments, including the acquisition of cloud-based communication and productivity software, an information backup and storage initiative, an automated budget development system and management, and a mobile device management security solution. And finally, contractual funding is allocated to assess the city's, the state of the city's current geographic information system and future needs. It's the amount of $70,000, but we've increased spending for training and succession planning, particularly in fire, police, and development services. And in the utilities department, in particular, important succession planning and training will occur within the existing budgets. In the area of administrative support and operational oversight, in the city attorney's department, the $74,000 is included for the establishment of a legal fellowship program. It was the city attorney's recommendation that it would be far less expensive to add an entry-level position to their staff than to contract with law firms. In the city manager's office, I'm requesting your consideration of an addition of $94,000 and to convert a vacant assistant to the city manager position to a second assistant city manager position to establish more operational oversight in the organization and have 2 assistant managers and eliminate the assistant. And then across the organization, we have about $1 million in additional administrative staffing support, recommending management analysts in development services, community services, public works department, airport division, in the utilities department, and in HR to strengthen administrative operations. And lastly, the budget includes the addition of a facility manager position in public works, which will be responsible for managing assigned maintenance activities, coordinating the city's effort to address the infrastructure Blue Ribbon Commission recommendations, and implementing a sustainable maintenance program. Almost done. The budget does not assume any enterprise fund rate changes except for the contractual 2.6% consumer price index to the city's fiber optics customers and a 2.6% consumer price index to the storm drainage fee as approved by the voters. However, in anticipation of rising commodity costs such as water and aging infrastructure, rate increases will be likely in fiscal year 2016 and beyond. Looking beyond this fiscal year, during the last year, the City Council and Infrastructure Committee continued to work on tackling the city's infrastructure investment needs. The Council approved the funding plan with a 2% transient occupancy tax increase, and the Infrastructure Committee will be meeting in May, and the Council shortly thereafter to review and adopt the project list for the funding plan. By early August at the latest, the Council will have to have put the TOT increase on the ballot, and of course, as you know, it will require 50% plus 1 voter approval in November. The city is grappling with balancing development with our status quo and the growth-related consequences of a successful local economy. The Council's approval of our Palo Alto initiative will be extremely important in the coming years in helping guide directions for our city. That's even more so in the strategy and schedule that you have adopted to update the city's 1998 to 2010 comprehensive plan, which will guide our policies on land use, community design, transportation, housing, natural environment, business economics, and community services. Another challenge we will face this year relates to the city's fire services to Stanford University. The term of the existing contract with the city in Stanford at this point is through September 30th, 2026. However, as you know, at Stanford's request, both the city and Stanford have been in negotiations over this past year to restructure the contract. On October 8th last year, we received a notice of termination letter from Stanford with the intention to terminate the contract with the city no sooner than 1 year and no later than 2 years from the date of the notice, unless we're able to obviously reach a new agreement with this. In response to their request for proposals, the city submitted a proposal in January 2014, and as of this writing, Stanford has not made a decision regarding our proposal. Additionally, the city is currently in negotiation with the Palo Alto Unified School District regarding Cubberley property. Had another meeting with the school superintendent this afternoon, and in February, the council directed us to eliminate the covenant not to develop as part of the negotiation and look at using this funding for infrastructure and maintenance needs at the Cubberley facility. If the city and the school district can agree on a long-term lease, ultimately additional funds will be needed, as you well know, to fund capital improvements and ongoing maintenance of the site. And we expect then to be over the many years going forward in the near future to go ahead and look at reprogramming that money. This budget, therefore, sets aside the funds equivalent to half of the calendar year 2015 covenant not to develop payment in the amount of $958,000 roughly in a reserve. Almost at the end. The city was scheduled, as you know, to start the golf course reconfiguration project in May. Actually, this week we were hoping to be able to do that. We are still receiving we have some delays, as you all know, in the necessary regulatory permits from the Bay Area Water Quality Board. Depending upon the outcome of the discussions between the city and the Regional Water Board, the project may be delayed in its construction start, and it could require additional staging reconfiguration. The budget as it's proposed right now assumes that the golf course will be closed during the entirety of fiscal year 2015. And then lastly, long-term, beyond addressing the maintenance of infrastructure, the city has pension and retiree health care liabilities, and as discussed in more detail in this transmittal letter that you'll receive in the written form, with implementation of the several pension tiers and working with our employee groups who are continuing to reduce the growth of these long-term benefits costs. I say reduce the growth, not stop the growth. So you well know that, and we've had some discussions already, that looking in beginning in 2016, we see potentially steep increase in those costs. So we certainly have recovered for now from the Great Recession, and our economy is doing much better. This budget tries to respond to some of the impacts related to that improvement and to redress some deficiencies that have been established during the lean years. The budget tries to build on many successful initiatives over the past year. And as mentioned earlier, it expands the responsibilities and reach of the city with our assumption of the control over the Palo Alto Airport, the opening and expansion of the two libraries, Mitchell Park and Rinconada, responding to the funding needs in the Development Services Department, and actually recognizing that the quality of life delivered through a lot of our arts and science and event programming and community services is an important investment that we should make. So while the council will need to approve an annual budget for this coming fiscal year, we need to keep in mind your long-term goals. And we expect, again, that you will be taking up the infrastructure plan, potentially by the time the council has adopted this budget. We'll be able to incorporate those recommendations and build that into the CIP. Walter will be presenting the CIP to the council later in May to the Finance Committee. Is that correct? So, and by the end of 2015, about 20 months from now, hopefully the council will be able to act and adopt the updated comprehensive plan, which will guide our city for years to come. So that's all I have to report. I want to thank Walter and his team. I'll let him, when he gets into this, identify the folks who are here and also not here. I do want to tell you these guys worked really, really hard this year, and since the economy was doing better, we weren't in the same degree of conflict, at least with some of our bargaining groups. It might have seemed like an easy effort, but the other night I woke up, there were some things I had to do, and I started sending Walter some emails and a response on some things at 1:30 in the morning, and he sent it back saying, you know, oh, well, you're in the OMB time now for us, so these guys have worked very hard. So thank you. I'll join my colleagues here at the table and turn it over to Walter.
Great, thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, good evening, Council and Mayor. I just would like to orientate you a little bit how this budget document looks differently. I have some slides here today for you. And yeah, I guess we can pass them out. That would be great, please. There we go. So what we'll talk about just in about 10 minutes or so is the design and format change, so you understand how we're setting this budget document, primarily in department sections up a little bit differently. We're starting towards a performance-based budgeting process, which means tying the performance measures with the actual action, adding workload measures, which you may be familiar with when you look at the service efforts and accomplishments report. So we actually grabbed existing data from city departments, and we're trying to combine this together in this budget document as a forward-looking document. Also, the budget proposals, we try to make an extra effort of being very detailed with those and adding some performance results to those proposals. Then I will talk quickly about accomplishments and initiatives, and the new section there is really looking forward at each department, writes about 5 to 10 bullets with existing budget resources they will have, not necessarily new funding, but within existing resources, what kind of initiatives they are setting for themselves for the next fiscal year. I do want to touch quickly on a difference and how we set this up between the base budget and the proposed budget. So and the base budget really is the existing service level from 2014 rolled over at the new costs, whether it's higher pension costs and the healthcare costs, or it could be allocated charges from various internal service funds. So you'll see this in the section as well. And lastly, looking forward to next year, fiscal year 2014, we redesigned the operating budget. We will redesign the capital budget in 2016. And something which the city hasn't done for a while is really issue in August a budget in brief, a short document which you can share with your constituents and be able to share them what the 2015 budget is all about. So we want to come back to the tradition from before. So looking at the first piece here, we implemented new publication software. So one of the issues we have, beyond being short-staffed a little bit at the beginning of the budget season in January and February, we also had to implement new publication software. Council approved this in December, and with that, we had to map all the fiscal data to match into the budget document. We redesigned this, part of this, the proposed budget, and it just was a lot of effort from the staff, and they did a really wonderful job. The overarching design of the book really ties in with the long-range financial forecast. You got this last week. You may recall we used public art in Palo Alto as divider pages because that's thematic of who the city is. We invest in public art. We wanted to represent this in the budget document as well. So you'll see typical art pieces which you have seen across the city, whether in public or in little art pieces which are hanging on walls to document the kind of work artists in the city have done in the past. Looking at budget summary overviews, and that's a child fun to have here. So that's really a new section. We put in the columns are the same. We report in 2 years of actuals, last year's budget, the proposed budget, and the change. One thing you have not seen before for large departments like utilities or public works, even administrative services, we usually just showed it by fund. This section right up front tells you the total dollars the departments are actually responsible for. So in this case, public works, which is the refuse fund, storm drainage fund, general fund, the public works director is responsible for about over $100 million. So it gives you an interesting view of what each department does with the dollars. Then going into performance-based budgeting. So what we did here is we looked at best practices which we have from other cities, as well as what Palo Alto has done already and built on that work as well. We reviewed the performance measures. We want to make sure that perhaps even better explicit, better written, and better clear to the public what they mean. So hopefully we achieved the goal. And we try to also add in workload measures. If you see here, for instance, the fire department is projecting in 2015 to stay 90% of the time within the 8-minute response time for fire and EMS response calls. If you look at the total number of calls they have, they're estimating 7,850 calls for next fiscal year. So that gives you sort of an idea how a department believes the workload will go up, as well as how they're responding and staying within the performance measures. So tying these two pieces of work together. You've seen the workload measures before in the SCA, but it's really a back-looking report. Here we're trying to tie this in with a forward-looking report as well. The next slide, now we're trying to group performance results. And we're grouping them by really 4 categories for now: quality, cost, cycle time, and customer satisfaction. So each performance measure has those identifications, these icons within the budget document, and each budget proposal, beyond just being trying to be a very detailed description here, but also saying, what are we trying to achieve with this? In this case, we have the Junior Museum and Zoo educators. We're doing some extra work with the Palo Alto Unified School District to provide more science classes to elementary schools, and what we're trying to achieve. Quality, we're trying to assist the school district in increasing their quality, as well as customer satisfaction with our residents, in this case our children, as well as school district teachers. This is just nothing to really read, but just to give an idea. So it's accomplishments, we have bullets on those, as well as initiatives. So you can look back at the department, what they have achieved in this fiscal year and the prior fiscal year, as well as initiatives looking forward. So for obviously the library department, one of the initiatives they have is not only to reopen the library, the 2 libraries, but also to staff them properly and to provide the same adequate service we have in all the other libraries in the city. So let me talk a little bit about a base budget versus proposed budget. I hinted this at the beginning. It really is several areas here. When the council funded 2014, one item, one time, we always delete that. So you'll see just a line item there, and you'll see a slide, the next one, like for a PSO, People Strategy and Operations. The salary and benefits adjustments, you're quite aware. We have a new contract with SEIU. We have healthcare cost adjustments. We have pension cost adjustments. So we lumped this together, and you see the dollar amount change for that. The allocated charges from internal service funds, also from the electric fund towards the general fund, for instance, for electricity usage. So that's what you see as a line item basis. However, let's say we have to now add extra cost to a department. That's a proposed budget proposal, which you see. And then we also have revenue alignments. Palo Alto, which I really like here, we basically show each department the expenditure and the revenue. So you also see historic revenue alignments. We looked at ambulance services, EMS calls, and we get some revenue from those areas, and we saw this a trend, upward trend, and we recognize this as a base budget item. When we change the service delivery and revenue ties to that, then obviously it shows up in the proposed budget. So the next slide gives you actually a little sample of that. So this is from People Strategy Operations. We had a position control software system study, which PSO is doing right now, was a one-time funding, and that's what you see deleted. And we see salary and benefit adjustments in the department. And by the way, the reason why it's going down is, we'll talk about this more at the Finance Committee and later on City Council. Last year, vacancy savings were separate in the non-departmental section. This year, we actually allocate them to each department. So based on historical trend analysis, we immediately adjusted in general fund their budget for anticipated vacancy savings. So that's where you see the cost in PSO going down. Then we have IT technology allocated charges, print and mail charges, and any kind of general fund administrative cost plan adjustments in this department. So let's look at the Pacific budget proposal. This really provides the staffing for Mitchell and Rinconado libraries. It talks about beyond freezing 2 positions. It talks about the square footage increase in Mitchell Parks. Even if a resident wants to understand why we're adding 3 positions in the library department, they will see, well, the square footage is going up a 4-fold. We have 62% higher library materials available in this library, and we actually need to staff this additional square footage and this work with additional positions. And the last thing you see there is the ongoing cost. So sometimes the budget proposal cost in this case may be different than the ongoing cost for the next fiscal year, because here we're funding 3 positions only for 6 months. Performance results, we talked about before, quality and customer satisfaction is our goal. So looking forward to 2015, we're going to issue the budget in brief document with the adopted budget that's scheduled for early August. And 2016, as we're implementing the new publication software with the capital budget document, we'll redesign the document as well. We want to add more information for each project, which are best practices, and we also want to fully redesign or complete the redesign of the operating budget document, which is more the front section. I think we need more historical data. It's just with the capacity of staff we had this spring, being short that we couldn't get everything done, but it will get done next year. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I have no communication cards, so let's take this to council if anybody has any questions or comments. Or if you'd like.
A chance to look at it yet, so you've,
Pardon?
obviously, I did want to acknowledge that council has had this for 10 minutes, so may not really have questions.
Okay. Councilmember Klein?
You're going way faster than I could handle all that, Walter. But
Okay,
let me
we'll
go
slow
back
down.
to slide 3, because I'm confused here about this dollars by fund. What's going on there? Because
So what you see here,
let me just add a little bit.
Sure.
You're showing, and I sort of understand the first several. Then we get down to general fund, which lists 13 million, et cetera. And how does that square with our general fund that Jim referred to in his opening remarks, that we're going to be spending roughly $170 million? So what's going on there? And I don't understand the last item, total dollars by fund. What are we talking about there?
so this is only the Public Works Department. So what you see here is the overview fund dollars which allocate to the Public Works Department. So the Public Works Director is over storm drain, refuse,
Got it,
airport fund.
okay.
We'll have this for every
We have
area.
this for every
It
department.
just doesn't have, pardon me? What's confusing is it's not labeled, yeah.
Yeah, that's my, okay, got it. It
Sure.
would really help to just say Public Works
Sure.
Department.
Noted.
And I think that may
It-
apply.
It's there in the budget that way, but not on this.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Councilmember Price?
Yes, thank you. A couple of clarification questions, if you could just review these. The structure, the language, the issue of performance measures, the relationship with the SEA document, because we've talked about this in the past, about having more relationship between them. And to what degree has that been achieved in this document?
So what we have done is what the department felt were the significant workload measures to represent their work in the coming fiscal year. We then took the language from the SCA, made sure it's consistent, and we update the actuals with the SCA for 2 years. Sometimes we update the adopted number if it made sense. And we also then looked at what the department projected the workload will be the following fiscal year. So what you should see, for instance, and this is not an example right here on the slides, with the library department, we're having extra libraries open. So the workload measure for circulation, how many items we are pushing through with the residents coming and pick up the materials, that increases.
Thank you. And I'm sure it's detailed in these binders which we just received. There's been ongoing discussion about emergency is it EMS services?
That's correct.
And so within this document, you make estimates regarding additional revenue which may be incurred because of increased use of those services?
What you see there is that the fire department we've added a third ambulance to the fire department. We're switching from basic life support primarily to advanced life support, and there's a budget proposal in this document which talks about the impacts of that, including the staffing changes as well as the revenue changes.
Okay, and so, and that also is addressing the issue of if you are providing emergency services to people who have no means, no resources, no health insurance.
That is not specifically addressed in the budget document, but I believe tonight at the Finance Committee we are having a discussion about EMS fees as a starting point.
Okay, because there are certain trips, of course, which relate to this. Let me see here. I have a couple of questions about the planning department. Now, maybe this is, I don't know if this is the time to ask these questions, or that's more of a detail issue.
I think this is an overview and an orientation, but, I mean, we're happy to
Well, just keep in mind.
maybe answer questions
Yeah,
if we can.
I think the Finance Committee hasn't looked at this yet and vetted it, so it hasn't come
okay.
back to council for final approval. So you understand that this is the launch of this.
Okay,
So
okay.
probably just looking at how things are framed, you know,
Yeah.
Okay.
maybe a
okay.
better way to do that.
Madam Mayor, I might add, I think that's been part of our past practice, that the non-finance committee members are certainly welcome to send the staff questions during the review process, and we will build that into both the finance committee discussion and reporting back out to the whole council.
That's helpful, and thank you for reminding us.
Yeah, because I will do that. I think that'll make a difference. The other quick question is related to the Blue Ribbon Committee and the infrastructure and the report. I can't remember the terminology, but there was a system.
The infrastructure management system, the
Right.
IMS.
Right.
Yes.
And is that being addressed here at some point in this document? Because that is something we've talked about, the need for that, and is there funding allocated to the initial stages of that?
So where the Public Works is right now with that system, they just finished the requirements process. What it means is working with other city departments to figure out what shall the system look like. Then they intend to issue a request for proposal this late spring, early summer, and then we'll come back to you as part of a contract. But we will provide you an update to the Finance Committee as part of the General Fund Capital Overview section.
Okay, thank you. And last question, the infamous cost of services study, where is that in the process? And if you could just start with that, that would help me.
Sure. So we started this in 2012. We issued a consultative report to the Finance Committee in summer last year. Then based on discussion with the Finance Committee, we are starting now to really establish cost recovery levels of our municipal fees. We have about 1,000 fees. So when we bring forward the municipal fee schedule, we'll bring a portion of that analysis at first. Additionally, what this budget does is it does add positions specifically to work on this type of activity. So we have a huge amount of fees and activity in the Community Services Department. That's the reason why we're adding management analysts there to really start working through those issues. We have development services. They have a senior management analyst to add to really assess those fees, and the goal is to have them done by 2016. And we have the cost of service study for the planning department. So what we are doing is we're moving forward incrementally with really addressing this huge amount of work across all departments and bring back incrementally to the council results of this work.
So you are allocating resources to complete the analysis and implementation of the findings of the cost of services study?
Yes, we are doing the cost of services study initially only looked at departments which are outside of development services activities. So we are starting to work with that with departments. So municipal fee schedule for 15 will have some results of that already. And the other additional resource we're asking to add to the budget will continue this work and continue other types of work within this broader umbrella.
And that's reflected in these documents?
That's reflected in this book,
Okay.
correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilmember Scharf?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the city manager for his presentation on this and a well-thought-out budget. We've only had it for a few minutes, and I've been looking through it, and I really think the priorities are the right ones. I'm really pleased to see the transportation funding. I think that's critical, and I'm really glad we're taking that. I'm also really glad that we're going to put the resources into Mitchell Park and Rinconada Library staffing. I think that's critical, and glad to see that was well thought out, and we're doing that. I'm also really glad to see that we're taking the % for art and hiring an art manager. I feel that I want to really commend the city manager in that what you've done is you've taken the priorities that we've done over the last few years really and tied it all here together in terms of making the structural changes that will institutionalize these in a positive way. The other thing I think that I wanted to comment on here was the staffing reconfiguration. I think that's a really important thing, and I think that'll make the city run a lot smoother. And I'm really glad to see that you're doing that. So I'm really supportive of that. The other thing I just wanted to call out on the fire services deployment study, I think it's important to recognize that this is really the end of a long process that we've come with fire, and that we've made substantial changes and actually come up with substantial savings. And that I'd really like to shout out to Chief Nichols, who I think is doing a really good job in driving change where we get better service at a lower cost. And I think that I've really seen that occurring. And then what's also really interesting and buried in this, and I think we should highlight, is the huge amount of money you're putting in information technology investments. That's one of the biggest things in here, and I think that's great. What we're really doing is we've underinvested in that for probably the last 20 years, as far as I can tell. And previous city managers have not put the emphasis and focus on that you have, and I'm really pleased that you're doing that. I think you're bringing Palo Alto, frankly, it's the center of technology in the world. The city is finally catching up with the environment. So I'm really pleased to see that. I did have one thing that I thought was a little confusing. So when I look at the general fund, total funding sources, general fund capital, the 2015 capital budget.
Point to page.
Sorry, and I'm looking at page 39 and page 40, and then I'm looking at page, this is the capital budget. And then I'm looking under the capital project funds. We've had this for like 5 minutes, so I can't focus and understand it. So I guess I just want to understand that we're not cutting infrastructure funding, right? Because this looks like we are. I mean, it looks like we're going 28 million, 27, 29, and then we're going to 18 for capital projects. When I look in
Public Works.
I know, and that's just in Public Works. But then when I look at the overall capital budget, it doesn't look that way. And I guess I just wanted you to address it and reassure me that we're not cutting our infrastructure funding.
The annual allocation, which the council has set about 2 years ago to increase it by $2.2 million, we're continuing that high level, and we're also increasing the funding in the long-range financial forecast by an annual CPI increase. So what you'll see is, as the construction environment costs will move up by CPI, similarly the funding will increase by that from the general fund to the infrastructure fund.
So we are maintaining our strong capital investment.
We are maintaining the annual commitment from the general fund to the infrastructure fund. That's correct.
Thank you. Yep, that's it. I hope that was enough. If you want me to continue?
We're good. Councilmember Schmidt?
Yeah, I appreciate the new design and look. I was very impressed with the long-term financial forecast with all the artwork that you had interspersed. More enticing document. Just one general question. This has come up before. When you look at the very end of the budget document, there's a table of organization on page 411, and it has the number of full-time equivalents. And I think they coincide with each of the departments. Now, is it true that these are just positions that are being requested, or do they reflect the actual people being paid at any time?
So the table of org for the actual years will reflect the budgeted positions for that fiscal year, and in proposed budget, it reflects the positions which are recommended to be added by the city manager.
So there remains a gap between the budgeted positions and the actual staff. As I understand, that can be between 5 and 7%.
If we're not able to fill the budget positions, there remains a gap. That's correct. I think that's what you're referring to, Councilor.
But there's an ongoing gap averaged out through the year.
Yes.
That's correct,
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
And that's that adjustment that Walter called out that is now actually being expressed within each department, the expected salary savings just due to that kind of churn or gap that we have during the course of a year. And if you look at this for the chart you're at, for example, these are all of the positions. In the case of 2015, most of these positions are filled. There are some that are vacant, and there are some that are new positions, so they would also be vacant.
Right. So in total, though, there is that gap between what is being voted in the budget and what is actually
That is
going
correct.
out on
That
a
is
current
correct.
basis. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Klein?
Yes, I want to follow up on the question that Councilmember Price asked and the response I got. If I'm understanding the response that you made, Walter, we're using the cost of service study as a tool to make various decisions on what our fees ought to be and other ways in analyzing the budget. There's nothing that the council is being asked to approve in the cost of service study. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
The Finance Committee, however, has spent a good deal of time understanding the cost of service study, and the rest of us have not. And if that's going to be the case, that we're going to be using it as a tool, it seems to me that we want to do something to bring along the rest of the council. So I would suggest that perhaps we ought to have a study session, perhaps just limited to those of us who haven't been on the Finance Committee, to really get a better handle on what the cost of service study is.
And we actually have direction from the Finance Committee to do so.
good.
When we met with them last in November, staff proposed to come back to the full council once the municipal fee schedule is submitted to you as part of this 15 proposed budget process. So we will come back with you to the full council with what we've done, cost of services, with a draft user fee policy we would like to analyze, as well as some initial results of cost recovery levels. So the direction is from Finance Committee for staff to come back to the full council, and we will do so.
When is that scheduled for?
I haven't scheduled it yet because I want to get through the municipal fee schedule first, but it would be either in June or most likely going into August.
Well, I guess I'm not quite understanding that. Part of the use of the cost of service study, it seems to me, is reflected in this budget document. Is that not right?
This budget document requests funding to continue to support the cost of service study.
No, but some of the results of the cost of service study.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Good evening, Councilmember Klein, Lalo Perez, Chief Financial Officer. Where we've identified the biggest impact right now are in two areas, the Development Center and Community Services Department.
Mm-hmm.
So the Community Services Department is what Walter's talking about. We are asking for additional resources. We're also asking for an additional position in Community Services to help us do an in-depth analysis based on the results that we have as to what fees we want to consider making a change, a policy change in the level of cost recovery. With the current staffing that they have, they're not able to do that. So it's a work in progress. There's not necessarily a recommendation that you would see for fiscal year 15 based on this work. It's more probably a 16 fiscal year item. We envision that there would be discussions with you as a council, a probability of referral to a committee, and then we envision community outreach to discuss the potential options that we would have with the community.
Well, I'm still not following. Maybe it's because the Finance Committee has had a lot more exposure to this, and I'm feeling at a disadvantage. Why shouldn't I feel at a disadvantage? Why shouldn't we have a similar session with those of us who aren't on it?
Well, I think you make an excellent point, and I think it'd be good to do that, and we also make the community aware that we're having this discussion so they can follow with us on this discussion as we put out the vision or the plan. So all of you have it, and the members of the community have it as to what we're envisioning the process being for this review of these services that we have, and how our portfolio is going to be shaped as we go in the future, because there'll be various options that we'll have. So
well, I think that this also would be a follow-up to well, I think the cost of service study got a lot of publicity a year or two ago, and then we've gone silent on it.
Yeah.
And so I really think we need to have some more exposure to it, particularly for those of us who aren't on the Finance Committee.
Agreed.
We agree.
Follow-up?
A follow-up?
Would it be possible or appropriate to have this as an information item at Policy and Services?
What I'm
I
hearing
mean,
is
just
that,
sort of so that we're brought up.
yeah, what I'm hearing is that it sounds like it's probably a need to have it a discussion as a whole. That way we get everybody on the same page, and then if you want to refer it from there to a committee, then I think it would make sense. But your call.
If I could chime in, I remember we stopped at the methodology, if I remember that correctly.
That's correct.
And the methodology is new thinking to a certain extent, and or at least new thinking for me as to how we managed the allocation of all the expenses that go into the production of our services. And therefore, it was good to go back to council to get everybody up to the same line with methodology, make sure that we all agreed with the way it was being processed, and then go into the transactional experience of the methodology, where you actually plug in the numbers and let it go out and tell us how much it costs to do things. So that's what you're preparing, if I remember correctly, from finance last year. So I think it is appropriate for all 9 of us to go through that. So, Vice Mayor Niss.
You all have done a wonderful job, there's no question. Even though I'm not sure the general public's going to pick it up and read all several hundred pages. Only one thing I wanted to bring up, which I did discuss before, and that's on page 31 of your actual, this is not capital, the regular budget. We talked about this previously, and it's the long-range financial forecast, and it is the one that always makes me uneasy. We've been out of the Great Recession, so-called, now for 2 years, 3 years, I don't even know if we can say it's 3 years. And we've done a projection here that's pretty much a straight line up. And we did discuss this in Finance Committee, but I think it might be worth it just airing it tonight for the other 5 who were not there, and talk about the what ifs. And you put those in the paragraph that is below that, which I was pleased to see. But this is just kind of a cautionary note that says this isn't likely to continue like this. In fact, lately we've been running 6 or 7 years and then having a downturn, or maybe 7 or 8 years if we're in good shape. So somewhere in there, we're not going to see that nice line that goes up. We'll see the nice line that goes up, and then it drops, and then hopefully it goes back up again. So I'm not suggesting you change this. I'm suggesting we stay in the reality, though, of looking over. If we were to take this and go back from 2013 back to 1990, we'd see something that goes just like that. And so as I look at this, which is 10 years, makes me uneasy that the public takes a look at it and thinks that we are in terrific shape and don't need to worry about anything. As I said, you may want to make a comment about that. We did comment on it back in March, but it's always one of my concerns.
Yes, indeed, we're trying to build in the business cycles into the model, but obviously would have to pick up the long-range financial forecast to get that detail. So deliberately, we put in this extra paragraph about the sensitivity analysis.
I was glad to see it.
Exactly. So I think one thing that we could maybe do online is there's a link right to the forecast. If somebody goes online, they can click on it, and they get right to the document and to explore deeper. So that's one way. Definitely online we can address it. If I understand what you're saying, Councilmember. Vice Mayor.
Thanks.
Councilmember Burt?
Well, first, just to follow up on that last point, I appreciate that it's in the paragraph. If the members of the public go to this, probably 9 out of 10 are going to look at the table and never read the paragraph. And so putting a note in here that says these projections assume recessions and those fluctuations are built in, get it right out there, and it'll save some things. So I wanted to go to the section on the staffing level, and I appreciate, which starts on page 411 on the table of organization. I appreciate that within the document we'll be going through department by department, but what we have is some very significant changes in both how we are structuring our staffs with the breakout of the development center as a separate staffing area, and additional staffing positions. And is there any other place that will provide the Finance Committee and the Council, as we dive into this, with a summary that really shows where everything moved? Because I couldn't yet find it, but maybe it's already in here.
Councilmember Burt, there's no summary table which exactly shows the changes by department from one fiscal year to the next. It's the table itself. It's within departments, but it's a very good addition to the budget. That's one thing we plan to do, but we didn't have the capacity to do so. Maybe for finance, we can provide this to you.
So if that's going to come forward in the finance, that'll be very helpful. And so to be not only changes by department, but for instance, in the development center, it would show up that the Planning and Urban Environment Department would have a net decrease that's significant. And that only is understandable when you look at the creation of the development center. So I think even just the summary won't do it. We've got to have the explanation, and then we really need to see where we've had the net increases in positions. And I know we will see that when we go department by department, but I think we'll also want to look at the big picture, because if we're having a significant net increase in positions, that's something that after a whole number of years of trimming positions, and we have a significant increase in 1 year, we're going to want to take a very hard look at. Because those are long-term commitments.
The budget proposes to add 17 positions, about 2 to 3% total.
Right, but it's not, and it's 17 positions, but it shows reductions in public safety of 8 3/4 positions. Which of those are in development center, which may be related to closure of a slack? I'm not sure if that's in this or where they're coming from. Even that net, and 3.5 of those are in utilities, for instance. So the 17.5, I went right to that and said, oh, does that tell me the answer? And then as I dug deeper, as we're here this evening, no, I couldn't sort it out. So I think this is going to be an important subject, and I think we have the details here, but we don't have the summary that really shows the moving pieces.
I think that's something actually this would be easy for you to do in just a chart. I mean, there's not unlimited movement, so even during the finance stuff.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Holman?
I wasn't going to ask a question now, but the prior question prompted me to go ahead and do this. So my question is going to be about the shift between the development center and planning community environment. And I think it's going to be important to also explain how that is happening and why that transition and how that's going to actually function. Because my understanding in the past has been that people in the planning department also go over and work at the building department and carry their knowledge on a project over to that department. So, how's that going to work operationally? How does that function? Why the separation? So you don't have to answer it now, but it's going to be important as we look at the budget how that will actually function. Why the separation? How it's going to function practically. Okay.
Let me just say real quickly. It's driven by a couple of things. One, we want to really have an integrated one-stop shop, and to do that, we've got to get explicit about where people work and how they're assigned. That still means people can have split assignments, for example, between the planning department and development services. Secondly, and we've not gotten to this point yet, but it's the next phase in this year, is to set up the development services as an independent fund outside of the general fund, so that we have it, whether it's a special revenue fund or an enterprise fund, we really directly associate the revenue stream with the spending. It'll make it also much better when we have the ebbs and flows in the revenue stream that you can have, that we're not mixing it all up with the general fund, and if we've got to make adjustments or cutbacks, it'll be different. But I think it'll be clear when we go through this, you'll actually be able to see, be able to identify that linkage between the two departments. We're trying to make more explicit the focus on the total cost and the total sort of clarity about accountability at the development center. Now, that being said, in the future, I mean, we could make other adjustments and that sort of thing, but in order to get this, the blueprint really implemented, we felt we really needed to get very specific. And this is not an uncommon way to deal with the development process.
I'll need some explanation further because your response raises even more questions for me that I won't go into now.
Well,
But,
no,
yeah.
of course.
Okay,
Sure.
thank you.
Well, thank you for the presentation tonight. I'm just going to make one comment, and that is on page 3, the organizational chart. It's actually the first time I've ever seen the organizational chart include all of Palo Alto, and I wanted to thank you for that. I hope that that's part of the influence from the Art Palo Alto, that we remember that we're doing this for our community. But it's representative of exactly who we are, and starting with residences who vote for city council, who then hire council-appointed officers. So thank you for that. And I think that concludes our evening for the entire city council. And we'll adjourn and let Finance Committee take over. 5 minutes.
Are we meeting in here?
Mark hasn't, I think so. Mark hasn't.
Yeah.
Shut up.
Nope, but he will.
I know, he will.
If he doesn't, what's our protocol?
Huh?
If he doesn't, what's the protocol?
Well, 3 of you, you're vice mayor, so you can